is getting to Norway, and the subtitles are what Africa can learn from Norway, and what the West must really understand about Africa. I say this because everything that happens in Africa is somehow positively or negatively affected by outsiders and historically by the West. When I say getting to Norway, I think in the last few years we have seen a lot of Africans, including some people from my country, migrating to Europe. And I'm not thinking about safe trip to Europe. I'm thinking of creating opportunities enough for Africans in Africa so they don't have to go to Europe for whatever reasons. Now, the book, as said earlier, it's creating opportunities in Africa, and there are different ways we can create opportunities in Africa. It could be agriculture, it could be industries, it could be tourism. My area of expertise is petroleum, so I focus into the petroleum industry. The petroleum industry is a very interesting industry. It has a lot of value chain. So when I say to learn from Norway, my book is not telling the good stories of Norway only, but to go deep down and see and understand what Norway did at different levels, from licensing all the way to production and decommissioning. So it's a very unique way of presenting it, because there are a lot of books that talk about the Norwegian success story, but to me, knowing success stories doesn't make a difference. What I try to look at is the value drivers. And to understand the value drivers, if you are familiar with Porter's value chain, it's based on that. And if you are familiar with strategic planning, there are the components of both. Now, some people may ask, why Norway? For several reasons. I have worked in Norway most of my life, and Norway have achieved extraordinary relative to other petroleum prospecting and producing countries. And probably the most important thing is that the national petroleum capabilities development. So what makes Norway unique is, from day one, when they started petroleum exploration, they started with capacity building. Norway got involved in petroleum industry in the late 60s, and what happened is an American oil company, Philips, today they call them ConocoPhillips, they came and they said, we want to take the whole North Sea, and they brought a huge amount of money. And what the minister did at that time was, he looked at the money, it looks a lot of money, and in the 60s Norway was not Norway of today. It was probably the same level of development like most African countries. But what he did is he told them, okay, thank you, we'll look at it, I'll discuss with my people and I'll come back to you. Yes, they came back to them, but it took them 2 years. In those 2 years, they didn't put the thing on a shelf and waited. What they did is they went all over the world, from North America, South America, Asia, Middle East, I think they went to Nigeria too, I'm not sure, but they went everywhere and they tried to see how people were developing the petroleum, how they were doing their licensing, how they were using their funders. And on parallel to that, there were other people within the government. He went out and started demarcation process of the North Sea. Because before that, the North Sea was not demarcated. And the only resource was fishing, and everybody was okay if Norway fished everywhere. But before they started exploration, they went to the UK and Denmark, and they spoke, let's demarcate it. And at that time, in fact, some people in Denmark regret it today, until today, the Danish were thinking of fish, the Norwegians were thinking of natural resources. So the Danish said, okay, let's demarcate it. And today, most of the attractive oil reserves in Norway are closer to Denmark than Norway. So anyway, they did their job, they demarcated, and then after 2 years, they invited Philippus, and they told them, thank you, now we are ready. We have prepared our rules and regulations, and we can talk. And you can participate like everybody else. We will make sure to make you happy, because they were the one who started. So Philippus and many other companies, they participated in the licensing round. Philippus got a license, and many other companies got license. So to me, if you ask me what's the most important thing about Norway, it is the gradual step-by-step progress. Now, in Africa, I can talk whatever I want to talk about Africa because I'm African. In Africa, unfortunately, we don't do that. Trust me, if somebody comes with a bunch of money and goes to a ministry or to a president, they will get whatever they want. Because we need the money. I mean, I'm not talking in corruption terms, I'm talking in honest terms. We need the money, we need to buy bread, so they will say, go ahead and give it. Norway didn't do that. Norway said, wait a minute. So one of the big differences between Africa and Norway is that we rush to do things, and I'll talk a lot about it in the next few slides. Now, when it comes to development, when we talk about problems in Africa, a lot of us will say it's colonization, neo-colonization, or whatever it is. And the Westerners would say Africa have institutional problems, cultural problems. Institutional problem is, there are institutional problems, but I say we can fix it. Cultural problems, I say, no, we don't have cultural problems. And I'll talk more about that as we go. So in the book, what I'm doing is, yes, there are historical challenges, which is partly colonization and interventions. I talk about structural challenges, and when I talk about structural challenges, the example I bring is about democracy, and we'll talk about it. And of course, there is political challenges, because once we elect leaders or they are appointed as leaders, they want to remain for life. Not only that, but overnight, if somebody becomes a petroleum minister, he thinks he knows everything about petroleum. If he becomes an agricultural minister, overnight thinks that he knows there is everything to know about agriculture. We'll talk more about it. Now, the book has two parts. The first is socio-political and cultural and institutional. I look into history of Africa, both at the politics, at the economics, at the social issues, and the second part is about petroleum. What I want to write is about petroleum, but unless we really understand the socio-political challenges, we will never developed, and that has been our problem. In fact, when I wrote the book, I sent it to a couple of friends and a publisher, and most people say, oh, you should make it 2 books, sociopolitical and petroleum. One of them is my friend here, president of the Chamber of Commerce, Memphis. And a publisher in Africa also said, no, you should divide it into 3 books, sociopolitical and historical, petroleum technology, what we can learn from Norway. My answer is simple. There are a lot of very good books on petroleum technology, which cover much deeper than what I'm doing. There are a lot of good, interesting historical books about Africa. The problem is combining them. Because when we talk about development, if it's an agriculture, a person focuses on agriculture. If it's petroleum, focus in petroleum. And we miss a lot. So what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to combine the socio-political and petroleum. If you look at the book, 2/3 of the book is about petroleum, but today when I talk, I'll focus into the socio-political issue because that affects every part of our life here in Africa. Now, learning from Norway. Norway has history. You heard about Renaissance. It was all about building identity. It was building a national identity under kings, monarchs, and things like that. Then there was Enlightenment, which was more about liberalism, democracy, and all those kind of things. So countries like Norway, they went 400 or 500 years to develop the socio-political aspects of life. So when Norway found oil in 1970, in 1969, they have these things which they could go back and look and learn from it. In fact, today the Norwegian parliament is called Stortinget. King means, Stortinget means big king. The reason they call it Stortinget is, we talk about clans in Africa. Norway consisted of clans also in the old days. So the clans, 2 clans, when they fight, they used to go to a thing, a sacred thing, to resolve their issues. When they became a nation, they called it the same thing, but bigger, Storting. So Norway or Europe, they have gone through the same processes like we have gone, but they have gone gradually and uninterrupted. Now, Norway went through Enlightenment, and as I said earlier, Enlightenment is about liberty, equality, progress, fraternity. So when they were discussing all these things, people didn't even have voting rights. First World War, tens of millions died. Those people who died, they didn't even have voting rights. So for the first time, voting rights came to Europe was after Second World War. So they built institutions before they started whatever democracy. Now, I'm not going to waste a lot of time on this, but Norway is a very liberal constitutional democracy. So my interest is Africa. Norway went through 200 years of Renaissance, 100 years of Enlightenment, and 200 years of gradual, uninterrupted national identity building. I'll talk a lot about national identity building because that's one of the core problems of Africa. The politics, social, and economic development. What was pre-colonial Africa? To me, pre-colonial Africa was something like this. We talk about civilizations, hundreds of years, maybe thousands of years But those civilizations, they were not the civilizations like what we have today. People were living as clans in different places and peacefully doing their own businesses. So we never had the opportunity to build nations like what the West has done. And on top of that, in about 1870, the whole African continent was occupied by the West. And suddenly new countries emerged. Suddenly, today we have some 54 countries. So between 1870 to 1960s, the whole Africa was under colonization. After colonization, we had some brilliant leaders, but they were always in a political play between East and West. What defined Africa in the 70s and the 80s is the East-West geopolitics. People tried or experimented with various development programs. We tried socialism, we tried market economy, we tried democracy or liberal democracy, but as far as I'm concerned, in all those things we failed. Then globalization came. When globalization came, then suddenly we had new millionaires and new billionaires. And globalization, as it has done in the West, it created other social problems in Africa. Revolutions, again. Now, I have spoken with a lot of Western experts. I said earlier that what happens in Africa also depends on outside. If you look at this map was prepared by the Göttingen School of History. This was happened like 200 years ago, and at that time they divided the world into 5-6 races. It says Ethiopian, it means black people. So Africa was divided into two, black people and Caucasian. If you Google today, the world map, you will see something like this. Now it's divided northern Muslim and southern Christian. Now when you look at this, you say, so what? This is only a Google, but this is what has produced this one. Look at the third one. You see Africa there, the whole world is divided into 7-8 civilizations. Africa is divided into Muslim world and Africa, including, in fact, the West is not like what we understand it in the West. This is actually the clash of civilizations by Huntington. Huntington is one of the best political scientists in the world. And every leader, every politician refers to Huntington to understand global politics. But if you look at the Huntington's explanation, he has a Western civilization. When I think of Western civilization, usually we think of Greeks and Romans. But in this Western civilization, Greek is not included. It is included with the Orthodox of the Russians and East Europe. Probably one of the biggest Orthodox countries in the planet is Ethiopia. Ethiopia is not included into Orthodox. It is included as Africa. Turkey, the Roman Empire, in its end part, was based in Istanbul. It's not included there. Turkey is a Muslim civilization. This is actually what a lot of experts look. If you don't believe me, talk to them. When we talk about institution, about culture, this is behind the head. I remember a couple of months ago when Prime Minister of Ethiopia, Mr. Abiy, received the Nobel Prize. Everybody was excited, and the Norwegian TV, they were talking about Abiy, Prime Minister Abiy, and those experts, they were saying, Prime Minister Abiy has a big challenge now, and the big challenge is to hold elections in May. When I saw it, I said, what the hell are you talking about? Is it for those experts to decide that, or is it for him and the Ethiopian people to decide that? Ethiopia has a lot of challenges, including elections. But when people look at the West, they look only at the highlights or the headlines. Now, of course, we know that Africa is not one or two civilizations. It's a lot of countries. People have different kind of needs. There is a national needs. Unfortunately, it's always forgotten. We only remember national needs when there is infighting within a country. There is basic needs of people like food, water, shelter, and things like that. And there are social needs like healthcare, education, and political needs, which are equality, justice, rule of law, and the rest of it. Now, during independence, the big challenge for Africa was there was no national identity. There were countries, but people never had this national identity. So that is one of the problems which we face today, because certain projects are national by their very nature. Petroleum development is national by its very nature. Unless you have a national identity, it's very difficult to have successful petroleum industry. I'm not going to spend a lot of time on this, but in the 60s, 70s, people went through Marxism, liberal democracy, liberal in France, and things like that. I like to show this map to Norway, in Norway to Norwegian experts, because the only thing the people talk to you when they talk about Africa is not about food, not about security, but elections. This country is one of the most democratic countries in Africa, as long as I'm concerned. They held elections every 4 or 5 years, and the elections are free and fair. But if you look inside into it, you see the top half of the country elects one person, another half elects another person. In part of the country, 90% of the people elects one person, only 10% elects that person. In another part of the country, the reverse. So for me, this is not democracy. It's not supposed to be that way. Democracy is supposed to be about ideas, not about ethnicity, religion, and things like that. So this is what I call, we have some structural problems. If you ask me what's the solution, I don't know. But we have a lot of good social, political scientists, and I wish they look at it. Now, so I'm going to go to the petroleum part, but Africa is not what it appears to be, of 54 countries, or as some people imagine it, consisting of tribes. Africa is, a very complicated continent with all kinds of needs, expectations, history. So when you talk about development, unless you look at, you go inside and look at it, it doesn't make sense. So I go into detail into that in my book, but I'm not going to spend a lot of time here. Of course, I envision, or I hope to see, a more united Africa. But that to happen, we have first to build a national identity at each country. Without building those things, it is not going to happen. It's going to be only dreams. So my book is about ideas, institutions, and practices. In fact, when I came inside, I saw a few slogans about ideas. In principle, that's a good thing. But most of the time, our life is not about ideas. Our weaknesses is building the institutions that give meaning to the ideas. And also practicing based on that idea. Okay, so this is the first slide I showed you. It's the whole value chain of petroleum. Now I'm going to detail. When you read the book, you will see there is some details on petroleum. If you ask any petroleum professional, he will tell you that's only a high level, and it is high level. But to non-petroleum professional, it looks sophisticated. And I did that in purpose, because sometimes, as I mentioned earlier, when politicians become petroleum ministers or things like that, they think overnight they know everything there is to know. So by putting it here, I am trying to make people aware it's not as easy as it looks. So what I want to do is that they should go and talk to their professionals. I have worked in Sudan, Nigeria, different places in Africa. In a lot of places we have a lot of great people with technical know-how, but without any voice. And the only way their voice could be heard is by making the ministers aware, or the president, or whoever it is, that this is not a game. This is a very serious issue. Now, national objectives. That's the first most important thing. So before we start exploration for petroleum, I think the most important thing is to have national objectives. What do you want to achieve with that petroleum resources? Unfortunately, a lot of times people rush because we need the money. So people rush and start the exploration work without understanding, without building consensus. So I have, in my book, I have about 5, 6 national objectives, and I recommend each country to focus on 5 or 6. Sometimes you see 20 pages national objectives. If there are too many, nobody cares about it, nobody understands it. I talk about maximization of recovery and optimization of production. And I have a reason for that. When you go to a lot of African countries, people are only concerned about production. They don't care about the recovery. Oil, if you have 10 million barrels under this house, you can produce 75% of it, or you can produce only 20% of it. So if your priority is only to produce as much as possible, you will kill it. And that's what happens in a lot of African countries, because somebody on top would like to see big production with no respect to nature, with no respect to technology, and we end up losing a lot. I like to talk about this because in Norway we have certain fields that produce 75% of the oil. As I said earlier, Norway started only 50 years ago. In fact, 50 years ago, it was American oil companies that were producing the oil. Today, Norway produces more oil than the best fields in America. And it is because of their national objectives, because of the institutions. They make sure that oil companies invest money to get more out of the reservoirs. Now, these are the sensitive issues. I read, there are several actually experts who would say in Africa there are not enough experts, so 1 or 2 people or few people can combine the administrative functions. To me, that's an insult, because we have a lot of experts. Do we use them or not is another thing. So one of my big recommendations is we should have separation of administrative functions. In Norway, I will show you later, there is a parliament which has certain responsibilities. There is the executive body, the government, which has certain responsibilities. And there are organs of the government, which we call it Norwegian Petroleum Directorate. Each African country has it. They call it Petroleum Council or something. And then there is a petroleum company, which runs as independent as any company. So unless we divide this, we will never succeed. Unfortunately, I have seen in some African countries, a president or a group of people run everything. So instead of using the resources, or the people resources we have, we don't do that. So one of my strong recommendations is, I don't care if it's, at the end of the day, if it's a president or a group of people that run it, but they have to build walls between the different institutions. The legislative have to be a legislative body which looks only at legislation. The executive have to be that implements the rules and regulations, and the petroleum company to be run as a petroleum company. One of the good examples I present in my book is Ethiopian Airlines and Eritrean Cycling Federation. Because if you look at Ethiopian Airlines, I'm from Eritrea, I have great respect to Ethiopian Airlines. It was established by the late emperor, and when he established it, he saw it as a national project. So it started like some 60-70 years ago. Then even when the Derg came, they didn't interfere too much into Ethiopian Airlines. They left it to go as independent as possible. Even after the Derg, when the previous administration came, they didn't interfere. There was some interference, but they left it to go as independent as possible. So today, Ethiopian Airlines is the pride of Africa. I tell people in Norway, SAS, the Scandinavian Airlines, if compared with Ethiopian Airlines, the Ethiopian Airlines is doing much better. So in Africa, we can build institutions. The problem is when we try to do all kinds of things with institutions. I refer to Eritrean Cycling Federation. Eritrea today have the best cyclers in Africa. The first people that participated in Olympics were Eritreans, who were under Ethiopia at that time. So the reason cycling became so popular in Eritrea was it was a national project. And during colonization, it was the only place where there was free and fair competitions. Wow. I need to... So anyway, the administrative structure separation is important. This is the Norwegian structure. You have the parliament, which has a parliament responsibility. Any development more than 50, any development more than $150 million has to go to the parliament. The executive body cannot decide. Any income of oil, 95% of it goes to a fund. No matter who is the president, the prime minister cannot touch it. So this is how it works. Okay, next. I think I'll make this one and then we can go to discussions. This one is a field development plan. Field development plan is the most important document in petroleum exploration. And it has different components. And I know a concrete example. Some people from the Norwegian Development Fund were expecting field development plan from one African country. And they spoke to the head, and he told them, we'll prepare it, we have time. This was a year ago. Then they spoke again, he told them, we'll have it ready. By the time they came, nothing was ready. they thought the guy was lazy. I told them, no, it's not laziness. It is, he has no idea. He doesn't understand what's field development plan. So I tried to show in the book the different components of field development plan. The purpose is not ministers to develop field development plan, but to appreciate it. So they could go to their people and ask. There are a few others. Corruption, we talk a lot about corruption in Africa. I think for me, the problem is related to the separation of administrative functions. So in my book, I divide administrative functions and how to make the petroleum operation efficient, effective, and accountable. Now, once you have done that, then there will be no issue. There are recommendations to international organizations and to countries, but yeah, sorry, the time wouldn't allow to go in detail. Thanks.
The order that's been stated, so I'll try to manage time, 10 minutes for each of you, because we would like to have more discussion from the audience.
Thank you very much. Since the author has spoken and I give the foreword to the book, I'll be very brief so that it gives the opportunity for interaction. I just want to emphasize the following in terms of how originally innovative this book is. He did indicate that there were those who had said break it up into 3 books, and when I reviewed it, I said to him, don't do it. Leave it as it is, because there is a tendency that we tend to be technical and we don't look at the social, political, and cultural aspects in development. And these are the major challenges we have. Now, he has mentioned the following in terms of the substructure, which in his book are the ideas, institutions, and practice, but also the superstructure, which is the value chain. But I think what we need to look at, irrespective whether it's the petroleum sector, or it's the mining sector, or it is agriculture, or it is special economic zones, we must ask ourselves the very simple question: whose ideas are these? If these ideas are at the elitist level, even in regional integration, of which I'm familiar with, then you find that they will remain there, elitist, because you have not been able to understand what is it that the society needs. For example, we talk about regional integration, but the truth of the matter is the elite, as elite we can talk about it, but the people have already integrated. I was just saying to my colleague here, the former Minister of Energy in Sudan, that not many people know that most of the sesame that Ethiopia exports is done by farmers from Ethiopia in Sudan. They don't even have any visas to go across. They just go across, they've been given farms up to 100-kilometer radius there. That's integration to me. So when we talk about ideas, we should ask ourselves the question: whose ideas are these? Are we simply taking the ideas because we believe them? I'll just give you an example for the economist, and my good friend is here, Joe. When people talk about the mining, the resources as a curse, it cannot be a curse. Because how come it's not a curse to those who have exploited it for their own development? It is simply because we don't understand. Then economists will tell you, once you have the revenues, you suffer from the dust disease. What dust disease? There's a new theory now about the dust disease, a new one, variant to that. That is nonsense. But we ourselves believe in that. We write about it because we have not really looked at it in terms of the ideas, in terms of the institutions and the practice. For example, if one was, exploiting, petroleum, the question that arises is, why should you not take, as he indicated, 95%, put in a reserve. And then people will say, no, use that money in order to develop. And I say, no, why don't you simply use it as a collateral for projects? Go to someone to give you the money. If you default, you can always do that. Because even if you look at Warren Buffett and all these people, they never use their money. They use other people's money. So government should also do the same thing. Now, with respect to the institutions, which he has mentioned, that is very important. He gave an example of Ethiopian Airlines. I forgot to tell you that it was not that very easy. I was working for Ethiopian Airlines in the 70s after the death. It was not easy because when the death came to power, what did we do on Wednesdays? I was in the planning department before Captain Mohammed came from North America. What did the death do? The death brought in 1,500 people from the Ministry of Transport because it was one of those parasites for job creation. On Wednesdays, if you booked a flight from Wednesdays, you would be checked in if it's 9 o'clock, but at 8 o'clock we're starting our Marxist-Leninist lessons. Irrespective of who, the pilots will all be there. The flights will leave around, you have, I had a personal experience, a colleague who was in charge of in-flight services when we started reforms. He then suspended one of the cabin crew because you fly to Rome, you fly to London. The cabin crew complimented, they remained behind because it was political. The chances were there, and he was shot next to my office, point blank, and he was executed the same day at 6 o'clock. So it was not that easy, but I give credit to Mengistu, and when I say this, people will say, but what did he do? I say, at least he accepted to let go Ethiopian Airlines to be independent. Even in 1992, when there were changes, they did the same thing. They brought a guy from the University of Wales, the new government, to run Ethiopian Airlines. Arthur Bisrat, who was then the head of a summit in Dar es Salaam, I worked with him in corporate planning. Because when they came in, they also removed the people with the experience. He had been brought in to revive the airline because it was going down. So I just wanted to say, institutions are important, but they are only important when politicians are prepared to have the separation, to create the firewall, and allow the institutions to be run separately. Now, the other thing, of course, is the issue of practice. Do we really have the practice if we have ideas and institutions? Do we really have practice what those ideas are? And the answer is no. It doesn't matter if, for instance, you look, I want to give you an example here, not on petroleum, but on the special economic zones. If you look at the special economic zones, there are ideas that we have taken because, and there is our opinion, he decided to create them. But when he created them, they were not enclave economic activities. Like the mining sector in Africa, they are enclave economic activities without any backward linkages, without any supply, value chain, etc. If you look at them, we also have the idea that if we create them, we shall then export and have market access to countries. But we are not looking at how do they become an integral part of transforming, agriculture. Because again, this is an element that is there. So I just wanted to say that this book, I commend you to read it because it is unique in the sense that it looks at these ideas. Now, people talk about the parliament, the executive, and the judiciary. In the forward I've written, I've indicated that in most of our countries that does not exist. Because if you have got the judges must always give judgment in favor of the government that is in power. And that's why you find that when there are changes, some of the judges are retired. I saw it in one country yesterday, a big economy in this region, where they are removing the judges because 2 years ago one president came to power. Now, those are not institutions. So these are the issues that we've got to address. Now people talk about democracy. Yeah, democracy is okay. But it's a question of voting. The issue is, are these people, as he has indicated, voting on ideas? or are they simply voting according to their own? I'll give you an example, as my last example. In 79 actually, I was at the University of Birmingham, and people said, "What Kalenjini?" They said, "No, it's a Kalenjini. The power was always been with the Kikuyu." Now, this is why I commend Raila Odinga, and I spoke to them recently with Uhuru Kenyatta. They are now trying to rebuild a nation state. Because when a nation state is on the base of tribes, and they will say it's our time to eat. Then, as I conclude, there was another coup, army coup, in one country, and I happened to be there. So I was being driven, because I always take this, I'm a former military guy. So when I was at the traffic lights, one of the guys opened the video and said, "They have put down the coup. It was our time to eat." I can also remember that. So these are the issues. I know the AU is dealing with all these things on peace and security, but unless they become brutally frank in terms that we don't have nation states. Even in countries, you'll find countries, provinces broken up into ethnic regions, tribes, etc. Just will not change. So I commend the book to those who have not read it, because it is. But lastly, it's a self-tutorial when you look at the petroleum industry. But you can take the same self-tutorial, apply it to any sector. Thank you very much.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. Assalamu alaikum and good afternoon to all of you. At the outset, let me say I'm really pleased to be here. It's a great pleasure for me to participate in the launching of this great book. And so many things have been discussed already by the author and my colleague here. That's why I will focus on specific points. And before I get into that, I would ask by a show of hands, how many people here are related directly or indirectly to the petroleum industry? 3, 4. Okay.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7.
Okay, about 7. Okay, that's not a majority. First of all, I'd like also to explain what qualifies me to sit here and discuss the book. Number one, I have thoroughly read the book, the version before the last, and reviewed it and sent my review to the author. And then I skimmed through this one, the final version, so I know what's in here. The other thing is that, as it says here, I used to be the Minister of Petroleum and Minerals in Sudan, 2018-2019, and currently I'm working on the area of petroleum and gas and minerals as a consultant. Also, by training, I'm a geologist. And geologist means, or geology actually means the study of the earth, which comes with it studying everything that's in the subsurface, whether it's petroleum, gas, or water, or minerals, of course, as well. And we call these extractive industries, because you extract them. And when we talk about petroleum, the same thing applies to other resources such as minerals, precious minerals, diamonds, gold, whatever it is. And what's in common, and it's very important and it's very relevant, these commodities are non-replenishable. You cannot, they are depletable, they deplete and they are gone. And this is very important concept. And that's why the experience of Norway is very important, and I'll talk about that very quickly. I'm fully convinced that every barrel of oil that's produced at any point in time must benefit all present population of the country, specific country, but also the future generations forever, because it is depletable. And you cannot say, well, okay, this is my oil and I just enjoy it at the time being. That's not correct. That's a very, very bad concept. And that's what Norway did, and I'll speak about that very quickly as well. So I'm a geologist, and that also relevant to me sitting here and talking to you. The petroleum industry, and for that effect, all the extractive industries, are very unique in many aspects. Very obviously, and number one, they are fast money generating venues. Very quick. I just read, I heard an interview with the Minister of Energy in Kenya, when they first produced the first production. And he was happy. He said, all of a sudden you have $200 million. It's a lot of money, it is. And that is the crux of the matter. You get a lot of money at hand, and if you don't have the plan on how to utilize it for the good of the nation, then you are in big trouble. Because that money will be spent, believe me. And at the beginning, you may think, well, how can I spend it? It's too much. And that's why we say oil is a political commodity. Because you get quick money, and you can make quick solutions, usually not studied. Particularly, and this is not to really downgrade or put down ourselves as Africans, but most likely here it happens. We don't think deeply about what we want to do. We don't plan thoroughly, and of course we don't even follow up very well. I'm sorry to say that, and of course there are exceptions. But in many cases, that's the situation, unfortunately. And that's why we just heard Mr. Sirat speaks about, well, people just post-colonial period in Africa, they tried socialism, they tried capitalism, they tried globalized concepts, but in a sense, mostly we failed. Also, all these concepts, they succeeded somewhere else. Whether it's in the West or in the East. It could be partial success, but they succeeded nevertheless. We need to ask ourselves why. Why did it didn't work here? I have an idea. I don't want to say it here, actually. Then these extractive industries bring to your country international interest immediately. And with international interest, never think that they are naive and they're just coming to help you. They're coming with their agenda and interest, although there is a contract signed, of course. But we really have to be careful. And not only that, this international interest and this international component that will come into your country will mingle immediately with the deepest part of your social matrix. The explorationists for oil and gas and minerals, they will go deep into the rural areas. They will mix with tribal societies way remotely from the capital cities and the big cities where the politicians are sitting. And that's critical. That is critical. If it's not watched closely, then you have a big problem. So these extractive industries are really critical to be understood well. And then that will impact social fabric. It will impact your economy. It will impact your politics. And that's why Norway waited 2 years before they said, okay, let's go for it. I have to go fast on this. The other point I would like to talk about, the Norwegian example. Since most of the people are not related to the petroleum industry, I would just like to talk about it for 1 minute. What is so special about the Norwegian experience? You need to ask yourself that. And why is the author trying to convince us as Africans to learn from it? Very quickly. They waited before they went and jumped into the thing. They understood what they are getting into, planned for it, and then they did it right. But most importantly, they thought about the future generations. Like I said, this, if you are growing maize or you are growing wheat, okay, this is reproducible. If you fail this year, then the next year you can again. The land is there and water is there, and you can grow it. But if you brought 1 barrel of oil from the subsurface to the surface and you utilized it, it's gone forever. Because we're talking about millions of years to generate these things. So every single future generation person has a right in what you get today. And that's what has been done in Norway. The sovereign Norwegian fund is #1 on the globe, on the surface of the earth. It's projected to reach $1 trillion this year. 1 trillion, I repeat. That's a lot of money from a country that has oil reserves of about 6.6 billion barrels, no more. 1/6 of what Nigeria has. Nigeria is about 37 billion barrels reserve. When I say reserve, that's oil ready to be extracted and utilized on the surface. So Norway has about 6.6, imagine. They produce about 1.6 million barrels a day. Nigeria produces something in the neighborhood of 2 million. Norway is compared to countries like Sultanate of Oman, for example, in terms of their reserves. They're about 1/5 of the reserves of the United States of America, yet they have $1 trillion in reserves for future generations. That's why people talk about the Norwegian example. The next point I would say, and I have only 2 points to go, I think this book is unique. This book is unique. The author talks so many chapters about the difficulty and the agony he had to go through in trying to talk about socio-economic issues, politics, and then petroleum development. To me, this is the beauty of this book. Because as a geologist, honestly now I'm fully convinced after reading this that these concepts must be taught in our universities, must be discussed thoroughly and widely in our conferences all over this continent. People must understand, as geologists, as technicians, engineers, economists, whoever it is related to this, that it's not just you extract it to the surface. What's going to happen after that? It's in this book. And that's why I really think strongly, as my colleague here mentioned, I recommend this book for everyone related to this industry. Politicians, and I tell you why. I was a minister. It hasn't happened to me, alhamdulillah, but I know of ministers who they had to deal with instructions from the president on technical decisions. Raise the production. When you say, well, raising the production will have negative impact on the reservoir, he says, what's the reservoir? Raise it. That's a problem. So I think everyone related to the decision must understand the impact. Okay, I'm almost done. When I was discussing during breakfast with my friend here this morning, he told me, we're talking about people who are graduates of Oxford with PhDs or in other of the prestigious institutions, with all due respect. But in all honesty, many things are about common sense. And what Norway did is about common sense and national identity, as he mentioned. That's what we need to do in Africa. I conclude by saying this concept must be spread all over the country. Now we have about 17 countries, African countries that is, who produce oil, and they are going to increase. The number is going to increase, believe me. But if we don't prepare ourselves for better utilization of this, well, again, we're going to talk about the Dutch disease and talk about resource curse and all of that. It's not, it's us. We must change the way we look at things, and I can guarantee you we will succeed. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I also thank the organizers for inviting me. Probably why I'm invited is because I'm part of the Technology, Climate Change and Natural Resource Development Division, which focuses on natural resource management. And I also used to be in the former African Minerals Development Center as policy advisor. So now it's gone to the African Union, but we still provide that kind of policy advice. I agree with my fellow respondents that it was a very unique book. We've all read about the Norway experience and best practices, and we try to advocate it to African countries. But the way that this book portrays it, and it's very unique. I read it as a story, like a story. I even felt that I didn't get the book, by the way. I just read a PDF, so I hope I'll get the book. But it's read like a story, not like a book, and it was really participatory, and it felt like we were in the book ourselves. I wore a lot of hats when I read the book. I was in Ethiopia, and I had to wear sometimes my Ethiopian hat, and it was interesting to see the Eritrean perspective on some issues, because we were always told of the other side, so it was refreshing. There are biases in all of us, obviously, but it was interesting because it goes into the detail of the Eritrean and Ethiopian war and the from the Eritrean perspective, and it was good to read that. I also read very interestingly about the Ethiopian Airlines experience, and also it talks about Ethiopia's history as well, from the feudal to socialism. The context, just to emphasize that context matters, and it was interesting in that way. As an African also, with my heart as an African, I saw the culture, the colonialism, the interventions, and how it really affects how institutions are built or not, or how it affects how we think about separation of powers. So it was unique. Of course, the technical part as well. I'm not a geologist or a petroleum, so for me it's always good to have the technical aspects as well. But for this purpose, I'll wear the hat of the policy advisor. So we do have a blueprint in Africa on minerals development, and I brought it here. It's the Africa Mining Vision. It was adopted by Heads of State and Government in 2009. The book does not make reference, although it's mining, but it's about minerals, so it does apply to oil and gas. Maybe not directly, some of the issues are different. But we do have a blueprint, and it talks about policies, frameworks, planning, and all the we have seven principles. Revenue management, policy, we go even to governance as well. Linkages to other sectors of the economy to make sure that there is value and local content. We talk about the environment, gender, all of it are there. This is a blueprint. But we even went further down, and we have a guide, Country Mining Vision Guidebook, that we advocate when we go to countries. What makes your book interesting, in my perspective, there are three areas that I find are key takeaways. In this Country Mining Vision Guidebook, we emphasize that the process is as important as the outcome. So we do emphasize that there needs to be a study on the context and stakeholders' involvement, ownership of the process of mining. But when I read the book, I realized that we don't do it enough. We go to countries, we have some good examples. Rwanda is one, Lesotho is another, but we did go to countries where we were semi-successful. Ethiopia is also one, we are getting there. But I realized when I read your book that we don't do, we do 2 month, 3 months analysis of the country, but we don't go deep enough to understand the historical, the background, how the institutions are formed, or if there is, because when something happens, for example, a coup happens and everything falls apart. So this is one key takeaway, that we really need to go into deep. You say that Norway it took 2.5 years when they discovered the oil. I think for the countries we go to, we also need to study very deeply. We just do, like I said, maybe with a consultant, 2 months, 3 months, and that's not enough. The second one that I found also interesting in your book was that we do give policy advice. So we go to the ministries. We go to the Ministry of, usually the Minerals Development or Petroleum Development. And they're the ones who formulate the policy. and we do give them blueprints. But I realize in your book you say that it should be the parliament, the legislative body. So it really made me wonder if it's applicable to our African countries, but we take it. I mean, we go into the policy, the ministry, we give them all these details and we go with them, we do the policy and the objectives and all that. So it's part of the institutional domain. I'm not sure if our parliaments are up to speed. I'm not sure, but it's a question that came up when I read your book, because we do advocate for that. And here we are even saying mining should be at the top. Probably is the Ministry of Petroleum or Minerals, but sometimes under the head of state or even the Prime Minister's office. We advocate that because they're the ones who coordinate the other ministries. But now that I read your book, maybe it could create some patronage or clientelism, or I'm not sure, but it's something that, I questioned. The third one, I'll be brief, is we advocate, one of the things we advocate is, of course, building human and institutional capacity. And we do that. Even on contract negotiations, we have lots of trainings on mineral and contract negotiations, mineral policy and contract negotiations. The African Development Bank, African Legal Support Facility does that on demand. Even sometimes when they are in negotiation, they bring their people and do African governments are aware that they lack the expertise in that, and they do. But you advocate for the establishment of a competent and strong institution under the ministry. You give the example of Norway, and they have this Norway Petroleum Directorate, which is semi-independent from the. So I think that could be a good example, which can be quickly done with countries, because we still face a competency issue, competency at all levels, but immediately is that the implementation. Some of the countries I mentioned, they do have good policies, national objectives, they kind of do the stakeholder consultations, which I'm not sure sometimes if they're real or if there's really some civil society or not. As you mentioned, we really need to do a good analysis of if it's real or if it's orchestrated. Sometimes it feels like that. So, but it's there. The point is it's there. The implementation is where it lacks. And it's not only competencies, but it's also maybe not having the right institutions, the strong institutions. So I'll end.
1, 2, 3, 4 in that order.
Thank you, Professor. I'd like to know if you have included the Pakistani population in Norway. I had the chance to visit Norway, and I've seen so many Pakistanis, and some of them, they drive like fancy cars, and they have their own like big houses. I asked around, and I was told that they came 100 years ago for the petroleum extraction purpose, and I was fascinated about it because there are many, even maybe the third generation, I believe, and I would like to know about this.
Series of maybe you stand if you say.
I was saying thank you to Mr. Sirak and the distinguished discussants of the book. We have heard about the Norwegian model in different shape and form, but this articulation is quite rich for me because it brings in the African perspective as we try to learn the Norwegian example, also identifying the complexities around developing the petroleum industry in Africa, the social context, political, institutional aspects come into place. I really appreciated it. And I also noted that you talked about the maritime boundary issue. We have only one example in the continent today where a maritime demarcation happened between a country in this region, Eritrea and Yemen, and there are a few examples that will become particularly important as we go offshore to petroleum development under the framework of the blue economy, where my colleague Asmeron works with the African Union in that context. So the implications about boundary issues, identification of territory, resource development, all these aspects I think is complex. So I appreciate that you flagged those issues in your book. Three very quick, questions or observations. One, a number of African countries, not only in the petroleum industry, but even outside, are going in the direction of local content policy, basically to capture more value, basically to do right with the natural resources we have. However, internationally, that is quite complicated because some say it goes against trade regimes. We should let trading to be more free. Mr. Shindiso, I think, is also very familiar with this issue. So, do you think local content policies are somehow a rectification of some of the mistakes we have made, and is this good, or they are a result of not planning properly the sector development itself and they are an offshoot? I was curious about that, and I wanted to hear your comments about it. The second one, last week we had a discussion on the side of the African Business Forum organized by ECA. And a lot of us looking at the future of Africa and the electricity sector is going to be gas. And there are a few countries that produce gas, and then we want that to be more distributed by infrastructure, and we benefit from this resource for the countries, plus for regional integration for a number of countries in the continent. However, a lot of the interest of investors seems to be we want to develop the resource and export it out of the continent, better market, more predictable global environment than the complexities in the continent. So I wonder if you can relate the Norwegian experience in this case. How do you make those decisions of what percent to retain locally for domestic use versus what percent to export, even within regionally? And those are the kind of issues I foresee we'll be dealing with as we go more towards gases in Africa. And finally, you said let's do it gradual, let's not rush, put capacity, train institutions, rules and regulations, all those good advices. I was wondering if that can also apply to some particular resources such as coal. A number of financial institutions came and said we're not going to finance coal anymore. The African Development Bank at the UN Climate Summit says starting 2020 we're not going to finance any coal to energy type of... so that poses the real risk of what people say stranded assets. If you don't rush, then climate change and all those global discussions will narrow the space for us. So whatever resources we have, we should rush and develop them. That might apply to some extent to petroleum, but there's a clear danger, such as in the case of coal. So, and we have recently seen in Kenya a lot of protests around coal development. In fact, the court has to freeze, pending further discussions what to do with the coal built for reserve. The country has, but is struggling to use it. So, for petroleum industry, I hear it clearly, but I wonder whether that would be applicable to some areas where the environment seems to be shrinking and we need to develop fast. Thank you very much.
So, I want to go next. So if you can be a little bit louder and also short because we are running out of time.
Thank you, Mr. Sirak, for the very informative presentation. And your book seems to be so rich in history. You said that for the petroleum industry to be successful, like there must be separate administrative functions. I'm from a country where we have a leader who runs the country, like everything, select the president, the prime minister, or select the prime minister, the ministers, the judges, almost everything. So for me, when you said that, I was like, impossible. Because, like, I mean, the whole value chain is there. So, and Mr. Ngwenya asked a question that are politicians prepared to have a separate admin function? Because this was one of your recommendations. In the African context, most of our leaders, they are involved in almost everything. Not just in my country only, but in most countries. I would want to hear from the panel, like, what can be done to prepare the leaders, our leaders, to allow the separate administration function for not just for the petroleum industry, but for almost everything. Thank you.
Yeah, I first like to congratulate my friend Sirak for completing the book and making it available for everybody to read. With Iraq, we go a long way. He is my predecessor in the post that I'm holding now as the president of the Chamber of Commerce in Eritrea. We had a lot of discussion about this issue. And in fact, I've read the book probably twice. And I'm reading it that time once it's in book form. As I told you first, maybe split it into two. It looks more on the socio-economic than the petroleum issue. But then I understood this book is not about petroleum, it's about process. And with that, I think it can apply in any other different structure of economy. The issue I have maybe sometimes is, we Africans tend to really blame a failure of not really succeeding in one way or the other is always colonialism and things like that. That has become too old for me, and we have to own the problem ourselves. We left all our day-to-day political life to some elite, and we've been run by a few. I think the failure is we have produced many, many professional and skilled Africans during the last 60 years. But where are they? Are they working in Africa? Instead of owning the problem and bringing solutions like what the Norwegian did, we still seem to be blaming others. I'm not saying that the colonialism will come into Africa, but it's been too old to own our problem. With that, I think sometimes I even been discussing with Sirach many times that let's forget the NGOs, the NGOs and also the UN institutions and that. Let's own the problem and find our own solutions. One of the biggest problems that solution coming for Africa from outside is that we see Africa as one bloc, as one country. We are not. We have different countries, different cultural setup. Eritrea is different from South Africa. It has to come with its own solutions, and so does South Africa. Maybe we can relate with Ethiopia a little bit culturally and things like that. But we have countries are unique in their own, and they have to really find their own solution for their own problems. That's one of the biggest mistakes that I see from us, especially the West, as being as one bloc, Africans. With that, I think I would expect Sirach to do more, and maybe many more books in this trend. And I congratulate you for the successful completion of this book.
Maybe I can, Joe, maybe if you can add your voice to the questions and just finish with this, with responding. I was actually thinking about having one set of questions and the other, so you would be the last.
Thank you very much. I risk saying something which might be of a challenge because I've not read the book, and my response is based on the presentation. I tend to take a different view from, I know my mentor is here, but I take a different view because I think the impression is created as if Africa is so bad that corruption and everything is, manifests itself. I mean, the Africa we know that, a good friend, Sengwenya knows very well. Africa of yesterday is not Africa today. We've made a lot of progress. We've made a lot of significant progress, and I don't know why we don't celebrate that. We have a Nobel Prize laureate here who, within 3 seconds, solved the problem between Eritrea and Ethiopia. Right? If you look at in terms of income levels, per capita income has been growing. Right? Yes, we have challenges, and I'll be the first to admit that yes, corruption is there, governance issues are there, all that, but there's progress being made. And we need to celebrate that. My good friend, Sengwenya, and I would say what you did for COMESA. Think of what you did in 8 years, where you brought COMESA. From free trade area, you were able to make sure that it became a customs union. You were practically living in Ethiopia, convincing them to be part of the WTO. You were practically living here, making sure that they become part of the COMESA customs union. Look at the promotion you did for Ethiopian leather. trying to add value to it to make it sell. So I look at all these things, and when we sit here and we talk about only our problems, yes, only our problems, which is true, we have them. But please, let's celebrate what we have. Let's encourage ourselves that we are making progress, right? Ethiopia, for instance, the free zone area you have in Awasa, right? The industrialization policy, which you were part of it, Mr. Ngwenya. We need to speak to that issue. African peer review mechanism, which you were part of it again, which review how, including all these petroleum issues, corruptions that you are talking about, right? Which we place countries on record to say, you are not taking care of the people. And you know very well, if Kenya had implemented the findings of the APRM, if South Africa had implemented the findings of the APRM, if Ethiopia has implemented the findings of the APRM, we may not have these problems. So I'm just saying, I'm appealing to you. I've not read your book, so I can't speak to the book. Maybe it has rich stuff in the book, but I think let's have a balance when we talk about issues. And I want to ask you, we always say, what can Africa must learn from the West. But nobody asks this question, what can the West learn from us? What can Norway learn from Africa? Thank you.
All right. Yeah, very great. So what I will do is, for the interest of time, and it's so sorry that I didn't manage the time properly, but I just want to give you just two minutes and 8 minutes. So you can pick any of the questions that were raised that interests you and just respond to it.
But Mr. Moderator, we lost 15 minutes because of the bureaucracy. And I think it is important that it's important that we respond comprehensively, because otherwise there's no point of us coming here. I think just allow us, we shall be responsible. Some of us
find a solution. Okay, in fact, I will start with the last question. In fact, in my book, I have invented a typical Africa. And the typical Africa I invented is the worst case scenarios of each African exploration and production experience I have seen. The reason is not to talk bad about Africa, but to learn from our mistakes. I celebrate Africa at different occasions in the book, but I want to learn from our experience, to learn from our mistakes. And the book is actually both for us and for the West. I don't know if you noticed the title, but it says what we can learn from Norway and what the West must really understand about Africa. Because as I have shown in the sliders, they think they understand Africa, but they don't. So they have to really understand what Africa is. And in fact, I present the story of Eritrea. I can write a lot of things about Eritrea, but I present the stories about Eritrea, Ethiopia, Rwanda, because I want them, when I wrote this book, I wrote it for international organizations, for African leaders, and African intelligentsia. So I want them to understand that each African country is different, unique. You cannot talk about Nigeria unless you know what Nigeria is. You cannot talk about Eritrea unless you know what Eritrea is. We have some people who believe they are experts of Africa, experts of the Horn of Africa. I am from Eritrea. I was always active in politics, but I will never call myself even expert of Eritrea. I am knowledgeable but not expert. So we need to make sure that people understand that there is no such thing as Black Africa or Muslim Africa, but there are a lot of Africa. So that's why I go into history and to specific country examples. One issue about local content and separation of powers, I'll respond to this. In my book, I talk a lot about the importance of separation of powers. But as an African, I know very well what you are talking about, and I can tell you I'll be surprised if there are any African country or any African leader who 100% believes in separation of powers. But we have to live with that, and we have to build on that. And that's why what I'm saying in the book, preferably there should be separation of powers between parliament, executive, and other branches. But even if there is no like that, then we have to build the walls. You can build a minister of petroleum. The president can pick the minister, but he has to make that minister of petroleum a real institution. Once the minister goes, it starts and continues building on what is built, not a wholesale change of institutions. So in that respect, we also as the intelligentsia have responsibility to try to create an environment to work together with whatever we have. Because the other option is revolutions, and we have seen what the result of revolutions are. So we need to find a mechanism to work with our weaknesses, to use the institutions what we have, and try to make sure that the institutions can work. Sudan, I told you, has probably the most brilliant geologists, engineers. But does Sudan have, and Sudan has been to the petroleum industry as long as Norway. But does Sudan have that kind of institutions? Unfortunately, no, because every time there is a revolution, there is a major change. So we have, my focus is we have to build something on what we have. Local content, I talk a lot about local content in the book. If you look at production sharing agreements of each African country, and I have seen almost all of them, they talk about local content. And to me, that's a joke. It's not a local content. What they will tell you is buy a certain amount of materials from here, do this and do that, build roads, build hospitals. To me, that's madness. You don't do that. A government has responsibility to build its own local content. Then it asks the oil companies taxes and build that institution. If you really want to have a local content, don't ask an oil company to build schools. If they build schools, Mr. Azhar, the minister, mentioned earlier, if they go in villages and build schools, hospitals, the people who will be loyal to their country or to the oil company. So you have to be, I spent a lot of time in the local content because I have seen it all and it's all bullshit. Because what you see is local content, then it will be brother of the president or his daughter who does billions of dollars out of it. So local content has to be taken serious, and I have a step-by-step approach on how to do it. I'll refer you to that book.
Well, I'm just going to take 1 minute and say, Joe, I think read the book. Also look at what is being said about ideas, institutions, and practice. And I think when you have read it, you will begin to understand that even the book does not claim that it is criticizing, it provides solutions. I think I want to make that clear. You have mentioned the African peer review mechanism. You and I were in Gambia when the heads of state of the African Union decided that the example of Kenya should not be discussed. There should be a special summit to see why under Mwai Kibaki, Kenya was financing 95% of their recurrent development projects. They don't have any debt, they had no IMF, etc. And they took that decision. They never met to look at it. It has nothing to do with whether they accepted because it was President Mbeki, you were there, when he said, let's not discuss it. Let's have a special summit. They never discussed it. Why? I think, let me tell you where I sit. We are dealing with a political issue. Development, first and foremost, is political. Unless you have a political leadership that is very clear, that is committed, you're not going to get anywhere. What do we do with multi-party elections? We even have got, people who are not supposed to be there, who come through there because they've got the money, or because they are trying to vote for them. These are the realities of Africa. We cannot run away from them. Now, you mentioned regional integration. Yes, we have moved. But the question is, where is that trade that we are talking about? We are still handling, on average, 80% of the trade with the rest of the world, notwithstanding the FTAs. So it's time we begin to look at it and say, what is it that is wrong? Perhaps what we have done, we have also taken the conventional wisdom of the rules of origin. He spoke about WTO and all these things, and we are simply not looking at our own conditions to say, how can we integrate these markets? My brother is there from the African Leather and Leather Product Institute. They are doing it differently. And this is why we are praising them, because they've got a different approach of how they are doing it. And it's now a continental one. So we did not criticize anyone here. We simply say ideas, practices are important, these substructures. But we also say you have also the issue of the value chain. A week ago, I was in the mining sector, where in the mining towns, about 4 of them. I went there before I came here, just to check what is the supply and value chain. What they discover? Only Chinese companies, they are the ones that are trading in the metals, they are the ones that have got the smelters, they are the ones with the leaching plants, they are feeding into their own factories. What about the local population? They are nowhere. But the local content policy is there. But that local content policy is also linked to the multinational companies because you are buying from outside. You have not developed your industries. If you look at Chile in the copper sector, you will find that in terms of their local content, they had to build their own capacity. Or you look at Australia, Western Australia, they've done it. So what we are saying is, let us look at all these issues and begin as advisors to ensure that we are as direct, I should say, as the late Gaddafi was when it came to these issues. Because he was very direct. He was not diplomatic about it. He would say what the issues are. The problem is, as advisors, and I never did that when I was Secretary General, you know it very well. And I got unpopular, but I was not there for a popular contest. My colleagues here will tell you. I was there simply to say, if we don't do this, and we must contestation of ideas, and forget about personalities. Ideation, as I have said in the foreword, and you have said in the book, without execution, is mere illusion. We have a lot of ideation, but it's illusion when there's no execution. There is a problem, a disconnect between ideas, institutions, and execution. Thank you.
Okay, very quickly. First of all, I agree with the gentleman here. When we talk about negative things, it's just to bring awareness so we can really rectify. And we must admit, yeah, there are some good things, but still we know we are not getting to the point where we're supposed to be with all of the resources that we started working on. And in the book, it's very clear, as he mentioned, it says here, you said you haven't read the book, it says what Africa can learn from Norway and what the West must really understand about Africa. So it's there. But we must face ourselves if we really genuinely would like to go forward and resolve issues. Regarding separation of powers, there is the mega scale. When you separate the legislative from the executive, from the judicial, everybody knows that. But within every industry, there are some separation levels that you must take care of. For example, in the oil industry, if you mix the regulatory body with the commercial, you have a big problem at hand. And the same goes, of course, for minerals or whatever, any other industry. So those people must be aware of that. Regarding local content, I think it's important for us, and I tell you from experience, we write contracts with investors, we sign them, we do not follow them, and I am responsible, I was a minister. We do not follow those contracts to the word, and that's critical. That is critical. Maybe like they said, Africa is different countries. Let me just say, I'm talking about my country. If you don't understand your contract very well, and you don't understand what the contract gives you as a country, you're in deep trouble. I tell you just a quick example. One time, we had a facility that the ownership of the facility is supposed to be transferred to the government after a certain period of time, or after the investor reaches a certain IRR. whichever comes first. After just few years into the investment, they realized, the contractor realized that the IRR is really going to be realized very fast. So what they did, they convinced someone to say whichever comes later. They changed the word earlier with later, and it's billions of dollars. And it's one person's problem. So yes, the local content is important, but we need to really, that's why I say awareness is important. And that's what brings me to the ladies' question, which is really crucial. What do we do with our leaders? What's the problem? What do we need to do? We are smart, all of us. So what's the problem? Why we are not going forward? I think it's critical that we have the right leader on top. Absolutely, I agree with His Excellency over here. So you have the right leader, then after that, we must ensure that we put the right person at the right place, regardless of any other factors. Okay, that's critical. If we don't do that, you can forget it. Okay, I'll just stop here. Thank you.
Talking about leaders, I agree that the leaders are the most important. But how do you have the best leader? I'm not advocating for any revolutions or anything, but nowadays people demand more from their government. So it's the onus is on. I'm not advocating for any, but I'm just saying that the leaders are chosen by the people, or supposed to be. So you're as good as what your leader is, or something like that. But I'm not going there. Talking about the local content, I agree that we have a sometimes very narrow notion of local content, and sometimes even in the policies we have like a percentage of gradual, because the companies would tell you there's not enough quality or capacity in your country, so we have to import. So they give them time frames up to 2 years. You can do that and then train, and very narrow definitions of local content in the policies. But nowadays we advocate a whole large local content. It's linkages, like how do you link the mining sector or the petroleum sector to the local economy and have a whole set of policies around it, not just the percentage of training that you give. So we have started with Ethiopia. I'm not sure if there's anybody from the ministry here, but we're studying, you need the studies, like how is it? Is it progress? What's the capacity level? What are the skill sets in the country? It's a thorough study that should be done, and then you have the issues of Chinese products and imported. What do you call local content? Which one is it imported and then sold here? There are lots of issues that are there that needs to be managed. But on the positive side, we don't, and the book doesn't talk about Africa in a negative way. Actually, it says there's no one size fits all. Everyone is different, and each one has the different context. And it's really, I appreciated that, because we tend to put all African countries in the same, but it gives you the notion that every country has its past, its history, and that should be taken into account in a positive way, so that you don't say it failed because it's an African country, but it failed because it adopted some socialist policy that were not, they were not ready for that, or even the liberal democracy that they adopted sometimes was not adequate. It's just that the point of the book is not to cut and paste the West and have your own type, of policies that are, you can take from here and there, but context oriented. Thank you.
The book is sold on different medium. Here it's about 450 krona, it's $50. Here we're selling it for $30. If anybody want to pay, they can do that. Contractors, if I can say half a minute. One of my expertise is in contractors, because after I finished my education in petroleum engineering, I took 1 year contractors. And I can tell you, I have seen most of African contractors with their local content and everything like that. And I worked for a big oil companies, consultants companies. I can write any kind of contract which will make you happy, but at the end of the day, you can lose a lot of money. So contractors take them very serious, because that's the future of your resources. So don't leave it only to lawyers, but involve petroleum experts, petroleum engineers, economists, because in a contract there is a part which should be written by lawyers. There is part which only engineers or geologists could understand. There is part which only economists could understand. So don't give contractors to one person. Try to involve as many as possible, because we are trained. I work for big oil companies. We'll charge you $3,000, $5,000 a day, and Azhari knows that. So we are trained to know in detail. Even though I'm the one who's talking to you as in a contract, there are 4, 5, 6 people behind me who would feed me all kind of information. Unfortunately, in Africa, we don't do that. I remember once my friend asked me to give a training program, crash program in petroleum contractors in one of African countries. And I said, okay, I paid my own bills, I paid my own hotels, and people came to learn about petroleum contractors. Then, at the end of the presentation, I told them, I hear you soon you're going to write a contract, you're going to give contract to a country. They told me, yes, we heard so. These are people of the Ministry of Petroleum. The people I was supposed to train were not involved in the negotiation. The people who are supposed to negotiate are sitting in one president's office, and they were not even in the meeting. So I wanted to cry, and I said, what the hell is going on? This is
He blames me for standing there.
Contractors take them very serious.
Thank you very much. Thank you just for the panelists. So I'm sorry to cut it short, but we have the contacts of the author. So if you have any questions, you can send to us, and we can forward it so that all remaining questions can be answered. Thank you for coming.
The books are available there for those who want to get copies. 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 For those who want to get